first like to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this workshop, especially given that most of my current duties revolve around animal biotechnology now, but I am the chair of the task force for the safety of novel foods and feeds, and it isn't actually often that I get to talk about the work that we do in the task force. And I will try to speak loud enough so that folks can hear me. If you cannot hear me, please let me know. First, I'd like to provide you a little bit of background about the OECD. It's an intergovernmental organization, has last count, last time I checked, had 34 member countries and numerous other partners, headquartered in Paris. And the OECD consists of almost 300 expert bodies that meet on numerous different aspects, working on economy, growth, etc. And these groups get together to provide advice to governments, serve as a forum for information exchange, and work to harmonize practices and standards to affect changes in policy. And I'd like to thank the OECD Secretariat for the content of this and the next few slides, but the little figure in the corner is there to remind me that OECD celebrated its 50th anniversary last year. It's coming up on 51, and I guess their vision statement is better policies for better lives. The OECD member countries and accession countries, I believe, and enhanced engagement partners are all colored in blue on this map, so you can see the reach of OECD. In terms of there's enhanced engagement with Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, as well as South Africa. But when it comes to the biosafety work that's done in the task force for the safety of novel foods and feeds, which I will call the task force, as well as our sister organization, which is the working group for the oversight, for the harmonization of oversight of regulation in biotechnology, or the working group that works on environmental issues, we actually have additional interactions with other countries under a global forum for biotechnology. And some of these countries include Argentina, Latvia, the Philippines, and Thailand. We also have significant participation from a number of observer organizations, and those include the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the United Nations Environment Program, as well as industry's representation to OECD, which is BIAC. Focusing now down on our biosafety work. This work under the auspices of OECD is meant to really assist countries in evaluating the products of biotechnology to ensure that there are consistency in terms of standards, but still very high safety standards. And another important aspect is it's meant to limit duplication of efforts, not only from country to country, but also in terms of different international organizations. In the task force, we work very closely with FAO, WHO, and Codex to ensure that the work that we do complements all of the other international work that's going on, but doesn't duplicate it. And of course, one of the purposes is to reduce the potential for trade barriers. How do we do this? Well, basically we work towards harmonizing regulatory frameworks and approaches for safety assessment. And we also do this by sharing information with each other as individuals that represent their governments in biosafety come together in these groups, and we share news and information. And we also use this as a forum where we can disseminate information, kind of as a scientific foundation on which the safety assessment can occur. The main output, our products in terms of biosafety, are consensus and guidance documents. All of the products we put out are consensus documents. That means everyone has to agree to them. But when folks talk about consensus documents, we're talking about either the biology documents that are the products of the working group, and here's one example, or the composition documents that are the product of the task force. And essentially, these products serve as a tool that can be a tool in the comparative safety assessment to determine, is this new organism or new food and feed as safe as its conventional counterpart. It also serves as a forum for exchange and cooperation. OECD sponsors workshops, discussions to share information, as well as the BioTrack database, which is a repository of the products of biotechnology that have been authorized either for environmental release or for food or feed safety. And that is available on the OECD's Biosafety website. As I mentioned before, two different groups, sister groups, work coordinating with each other, but we have different areas. The working group for the harmonization of regulatory oversight in biotechnology, they work on environmental safety. And the group that I work in, which is the task force for the safety of novel foods and feeds. And obviously we do food and feed. I was asked to discuss the composition documents that the task force puts together. And a lot of times folks don't really know what these documents are. And essentially, when we are developing these documents, we see them as a compilation of data and information that we find relevant to food and feed safety that can be used as a tool in a comparative safety assessment. The documents are intended for a broad audience. It could be regulators, risk assessors. It could be the developers of new varieties. It could be academic scientists. It could be people just curious about a particular food crop. And these documents are mutually acceptable to, but not legally binding on, members. Now I'll give you a broad overview of how we actually develop these documents. And this is a nice little picture of one of the completed documents. Once they're completed, they print them out. They're available for purchase, but they're also all available upon completion on the OECD website. So, in order to start this process, one of the task force members has to decide, we think this is a good idea, good enough idea to develop a formal proposal that's submitted to the task force a minimum of 6 weeks in advance of a meeting. Then the task force gets to decide if and discusses whether or not they think that this is a priority. Usually in terms of the composition documents, usually the task force is quite agreeable, and typically we take what is called the lead country approach. Either the country that proposed, typically the country that proposed the particular project, sometimes in combination with another country or two, lead the writing of the document. Oftentimes there's also a group of other experts, both within those countries as well as other task force members, that serve as an ad hoc expert group. and they are the most involved in the writing and development of one of these documents. Over the years, we have developed an internal document for the countries that decide, the members that decide they're going to undertake the drafting process. And that's kind of a guide as to what things we think about when we're drafting one of these documents. It's not an external document, it's not available to the public, and it is a living document. Although I think we've produced around 22 or 23 of these composition documents, our thinking is still evolving. And things change, thoughts change, and as that happens, we incorporate these changes into that internal document. Okay, so now the lead countries have produced a draft. What happens next? Well, that is submitted to the task force for review, and the task force provides input both in plenary sessions. Oftentimes the documents go through discussion paragraph by paragraph, sometimes sentence by sentence, and electronic input. This is an iterative process. The lead country or countries, an ad hoc expert group, will then revise based on the input. It goes back to the task force, and so on and so forth, until consensus is achieved. Sometimes that can be very quick. We can have 2 drafts, and it will be declassified. Other times, speaking from experience, it can be many, many, many drafts, and can take a number of years to finish one of these documents. This is a very labor-intensive process for those that are writing the document. Once consensus is achieved, the document is circulated to our parent body, which is the joint meeting of the Chemicals Committee and the Working Party on Chemicals, Pesticides, and Biotechnology, and then it's declassified. At that point, it goes into press, where it is printed up in these nice little forms with these nice yellow covers, and it's also made available on the web as a PDF. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the documents using a recent example, and that would be the revised consensus document on compositional considerations for new varieties of soybean, key food and feed nutrients, anti-nutrients, toxicants, and allergens. And as you will note, this doesn't have the nice yellow cover, and that's because it was declassified in August. And as the lead country, we are very pleased that it is finished now. As Dr. Kitta this morning said, it is a vast undertaking to revise one of these documents, and that is the truth. This is a revision of the initial soybean document that was the second document issued by the task force, and we felt that it was ripe. There was sufficient data and information that was not available when the initial document was drafted, and sufficient to warrant drafting a new version. We thought it was going to be very quick and straightforward to insert new information. It was not so quick and straightforward, and I think in retrospect we learned that when revising a document, it's probably best to throw out the format from the first document, which essentially was before we kind of crystallized our thinking, and start over from scratch. Unfortunately, we didn't do that at first. As I said, the U.S. led the development of this document with the assistance of an ad hoc expert group consisting of experts from Austria, Canada, the European Union, and BIAC. We got significant input from a number of task force members from Australia, Austria, BIAC, Canada, ILSI, Japan, the Netherlands, the Secretariat, Sweden. And I can't even tell you how many revisions we had of this particular document. This is just an overview of the table of contents, just to provide you with a snapshot of the structure of the document. The foreword, the preamble, and the role of the comparative approach as part of a safety assessment, that's all standard language that is maintained from document to document, or as the documents change over time, the newer documents will have slightly newer language. But the meat of the document doesn't really start until section 1, the background. It gives information on global production, as well as the uses of this crop in food and feed. Has some nice diagrams laying out what happens in processing. It also has a section, appropriate comparators for testing new varieties. That is also a standard section from document to document, as well as a discussion of the characteristics that are screened by soybean developers. We have nutrients on section 2, and looking at the nutrients, any information that we can find in terms of nutrients in seeds, oil, soybean meal, hulls, and forage. And section 3 consists of other constituents in soybeans. These include anti-nutrients and toxicants, other compounds that are not classified as necessarily as nutrients, but were felt to be important to include in the document, as well as allergens. In those sections, the previous sections on nutrients and other constituents, that is really all the data that we can find that's available. When we get down to section 4 and 5, this is where the task force really takes a close look, because it is in this section that the task force decides what it believes are the really important components to be looked at and to be analyzed. Often there's a lot of discussion about these, both the food components and the feed components that are suggested to be analyzed. And as you can see here, it's typically proximate amino acids, fatty acids, in this case some vitamins, as well as some other constituents for food safety. And a similar list, but slightly different, because there are some differences with feed, the differences in terms of safety and nutrition for human food and animal feed, and those are laid out in this document. And this is just a list of the documents that the task force has completed to date. We have a number of documents that are currently being written. Currently, the rice document is under revision by Japan, and at our last meeting, there were a number of suggestions for new composition documents that could be undertaken by the task force. All of these documents you can access directly via this website, and those go beyond those of the composition documents. Those include molecular characterization as well. And that's pretty much it.
Joseph Onyeka from Nigeria. Part of the work of the Biosafety group of the OECD is to assist countries in evaluating risk of products. And I want to ask, in assisting countries, do you restrict your assistance to member countries, or do you extend it to non-member countries?
The question was in terms of the assistance provided by the biosafety groups at OECD. Is the assistance provided to just the OECD members or other countries? And we absolutely include other countries as well. We have had a number of non-member countries that have not only come to the task force and sat up at the table as any other delegation, but we've also had non-members produce documents, lead the development of documents. And they've submitted proposals for crops that were important to their country, and they have led the development of those documents. I think cassava is an example, as well as I think sweet potato. I'm looking for Marilia in the audience, and she's not looking. But no, absolutely. We are happy to work on a document and provide that assistance to any country that's willing to come forward and help us develop a document.
Does the OECD task force maintain a public list or declaration of what you're working on, or is that in a sense a secret until you get through the process?
I don't know that it's so much a secret, but the list that's maintained on the website is what's completed. I don't know that I don't know the particular rationale for just listing the completed documents, but typically the ones that are under development are available to the task force members. And by task force members, I mean those that participate in the task force, not OECD countries, not just limited to OECD member countries, but anyone that participates in the task force.